I didn't cry. The cab pulled into our driveway at 11:43 on a Tuesday night, and I sat there for a moment just looking at the house. The porch light was off. I always left the porch light on when I traveled. My wife knew that. She'd leave it on for me without being asked every time for 31 years. It was off. I told myself it was nothing. A burnt bulb. Maybe she'd gone to bed early and forgotten. I paid the driver, grabbed my bag from the trunk, and walked up the front path. The grass was long. Not catastrophically long, but enough that I noticed. I'd been gone 11 days. Grass doesn't grow that fast in October in Ontario. I used my key. The house was dark except for the light above the stove, the one my wife always left on low so I could find my way to the kitchen. That detail made my chest loosen a little. She remembered. She was just asleep. Then I heard something from down the hall. It wasn't loud. It was barely anything, a small sound like someone shifting in a chair or trying to. I set my bag down without making noise and walked toward it. The door to the sunroom was half open. We'd converted it into her sitting room when her knees started giving her trouble 2 years ago. She liked to watch the backyard from in there, the bird feeders, the maple that turned red every fall. She was in the recliner, not asleep. Her eyes were open, and they found me the moment I stepped through the door, and what I saw in them was not surprise or relief. It was something that took me a few seconds to name. It was shame. "Don't," she said very quietly. "Don't make a fuss." Her lips were cracked. There was a glass on the side table, and I picked it up, and it was empty, bone dry. The small blanket over her lap was the same one she'd had on 3 weeks ago when I left. The TV remote was on the floor, and I could tell by the way she was sitting that she hadn't been able to reach it. There was a plate on the tray table beside her with what looked like the remnants of a single piece of toast. I didn't know how old it was. "How long?" I said. My voice came out very even. "I'm not sure how." "I'm fine," she said. "How long have you been sitting here?" She looked away from me toward the window. It was dark outside. She couldn't see anything out there, but she looked anyway. "Since yesterday morning," she said. "Maybe the morning before. I lose track in the evenings." I filled the glass 3 times. I made her drink slowly. I sat on the footstool in front of her recliner and held her hands, which were cold, and I did not let her see my face until I was certain it was under control. She'd had a mild stroke 14 months before. The left side of her body was weaker than it used to be. She could walk with her cane, short distances, but she tired quickly, and she wasn't supposed to be left alone for extended periods. That was the whole reason we had made the arrangement we'd made. I had hired my daughter to look after her. Let me back up. I retired from 32 years with the City of Hamilton's engineering department in the spring of the previous year. My wife, I'll call her my love because that's what she is, had been managing her post-stroke recovery well, all things considered. She had a physiotherapist who came twice a week. She had her sister visiting on Sundays. She had me most of the time. But I still traveled for consulting work, not constantly, but several times a year, sometimes for a week or two at a stretch. We had talked, she and I, about what made sense. Neither of us wanted a stranger coming into the house full time. My wife is a private woman. She grew up in a small town outside of Sudbury, and she has her dignity about her, and the idea of a rotating cast of caregivers from an agency made her uncomfortable. Our daughter had been between jobs. She's 34, has a background in social services administration, and she'd spent a year working at a long-term care facility before moving into office management. She understood medication schedules, and she understood routine, and she understood her mother. Or so I believed. We sat down together, the 3 of us, at the kitchen table, and I made the offer. I would pay her $3,000 a month to be present in the house when I was away. Not full-time caregiving. Her mother didn't need that level of assistance yet, but present. Meals, medication reminders, company, and the ability to respond if something went wrong. I put it in writing. I transferred the first month in advance. She hugged her mother. She said she was glad to help. She said she was glad we trusted her. My daughter lived 40 minutes away in Stony Creek with her husband who worked in automotive sales. They had a nice enough house. They also had a line of credit that I'd quietly helped them extend 18 months prior when things got tight, because that's what fathers do. I should have paid more attention to what they were doing with the money. I should have paid more attention to a lot of things. The trip that ended early had been to Calgary. I was consulting on a municipal infrastructure review, projected to run 12 days. On day 8, my client's organization hit a bureaucratic snag that pushed everything back by 3 weeks, and they had no need for me to sit in a hotel room in Calgary burning through their per diem. My flight home the following morning was fully booked. I got on standby for an evening flight, got lucky, and was back in Hamilton by midnight. I didn't call ahead. I thought about it. It was late, and I didn't want to wake my wife, and I thought it would be nice to simply be there in the morning when she woke up, a small, pleasant surprise. Nothing about what I came home to was pleasant. After she had water, after she had half a bowl of soup that I heated from a can she pointed me toward in the cupboard, I asked her what had happened. She didn't want to tell me. She kept deflecting, kept saying she was fine now, kept asking about my trip. "Where is our daughter?" I said. A long pause. "She's been staying at home," my wife said carefully. "She comes by." "When did she last come by?" Another pause. Longer. "She brought groceries on Saturday," my wife said. "Today was Tuesday." In October in Ontario, the days get dark early and blend together, but I was very certain it was Tuesday. And before Saturday, she looked at the window again. "She's busy," she said. "Her husband's been having a hard time with work." I didn't say anything. I put my hand over hers, and I didn't say anything. She fell asleep in the recliner around 1 in the morning. I covered her with a proper blanket, one that was actually warm, and I went to the kitchen and I sat at the table in the dark. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because this is not a story about rage. Not really. Rage is loud and hot, and it burns through you quickly. What I felt was quieter than that. It was the particular grief of a man who understands, with perfect clarity, that he had made a catastrophic mistake in judgment, and that his wife had paid for it. She had been sitting in that chair for at least 2 days. She had not wanted to worry me. She had not wanted to make trouble. She had been covering for our daughter, because that's the kind of woman she is, generous almost to the point of self-destruction, and our daughter had known that. Our daughter had counted on it. I didn't sleep. I spent the night going through things. The medication log I'd set up on the kitchen counter, a simple notebook where the date and each pill was supposed to be initialed, had entries up to October 3rd. It was the 15th. 12 days of missed entries, which meant either the medications hadn't been given or they had been given by no one who felt accountable enough to sign. My wife's physiotherapist was a woman who communicated by text. I scrolled back through my wife's phone, which I'd brought out of the sitting room to charge. The last text exchange with the physiotherapist was from September 22nd, canceling that week's appointment. I scrolled back further. 2 cancellations in September, both initiated by someone from my wife's number. I read the messages again. The phrasing wasn't hers. My wife writes in complete sentences. She uses punctuation. These texts were clipped and casual in a way she never is. Someone had been using her phone to cancel appointments. I sat with that for a very long time. In the morning I called our daughter. I kept my boys completely neutral. I said I was home early. that things had been rescheduled, and that I wanted to touch base. She said, "Oh, wonderful. She'd been meaning to come by anyway." She asked how my wife was doing. She asked this in the tone of someone asking about a plant they've been watering, perfunctory, unconcerned. I said everything was fine. I said, "Take your time." She arrived that afternoon. Her husband wasn't with her. She came in through the front door, which I'd left unlocked, and she found me in the kitchen making lunch. She kissed me on the cheek and asked where Mom was, and I said resting, which was true. She sat down at the table and accepted a coffee, and we talked about nothing for 10 minutes. The drive from Stony Creek, the weather, whether the Leafs were going to have a decent season. Then I put my coffee down and I looked at her. "Tell me about the physiotherapist," I said. She blinked. "What about her?" "The appointments in September, the cancellations." A very brief pause. Mom was tired. She asked me to reschedule. Both times. She didn't feel up to it. And the medication log. Another pause. Longer this time. "I was tracking it differently," she said. "On my phone. I can show you." "Show me," I said. She took out her phone and made a production of scrolling. I watched her face. I've known her face her entire life. I was in the room when she was born. I know every expression she makes. What I was watching was not someone retrieving information. It was someone composing a story. "I must have deleted it accidentally," she said. "I can reconstruct it from memory, most of it." I nodded. I said that would be very helpful. I said we could do that later. I kept my voice easy. What I did not tell her was that on the same morning, before she arrived, I had called the physiotherapist's office directly. I'd spoken to the woman herself, who was professional and careful but clear. My wife had canceled 7 appointments since July. 7. My wife had told me when I'd asked her that morning that the physiotherapist had canceled twice because of a family matter. That was all. I also did not tell her that I had called our family doctor's office and asked when my wife had last come in. The answer was August, for a routine follow-up. There had been a call in September requesting a change to her medication, a request the doctor's receptionist flagged because it hadn't come from my wife or from me, and the doctor had declined to process it. I made note of the doctor's name who had made the call and when. I also did not tell her that I had spent the morning photographing the medication log, my wife's phone records, and the interior of the refrigerator, which contained almost nothing. I let my daughter drink her coffee. I let her tell me about her husband's situation at the dealership, about how the commissions had been inconsistent, about how expensive everything had gotten. I listened. I nodded. I refilled her cup. When she left, she hugged me, and she hugged her mother, and she said she'd be back Thursday. She waved from the driveway. I watched her go. Over the next 2 weeks, I was methodical. I want to be clear that I am not a dramatic man. I worked in municipal infrastructure for over 3 decades. My entire professional life was about documentation, process, and getting things right before you act. I applied those same principles. I requested 3 months of bank records for the account from which I'd been making the monthly transfers to my daughter. The transfers had gone through. The money had been received. I then asked my wife, very gently, over several evenings, about the weeks I'd been away. I didn't press. I let her tell me at her own pace, and I listened, and I took notes afterward. What emerged was a picture I had not wanted to see. In July, our daughter had begun shortening her visits, an hour instead of an afternoon, a check-in phone call instead of the visit. By August, she was coming roughly twice a week, sometimes once. She would bring food, not always enough, and not always things my wife could easily prepare herself. The standing grocery order I had set up through an online delivery service had been modified in August. I'd set it to my email for receipts. And when I went back through my inbox, I found the confirmation of a change of delivery address notification I had not processed because it had landed in a folder I rarely checked. The groceries had been redirected to my daughter's address in Stony Creek. She had been redirecting our grocery delivery to her own home. I had been paying for her household's food for 3 months. By September, according to my wife, our daughter was coming once a week, sometimes less. She would arrive, check that the basics were in order, and leave within an hour. She would set out food for the next day or two and consider her obligation met. She brought her daughter once, my granddaughter, who is 7, and they sat in the living room and watched something on her iPad, and that was the visit. When I had been away for 11 days in October, my daughter had come twice. Once at the beginning, once to drop groceries on that Saturday, 4 days before I arrived home. My wife had not wanted to call me. She'd been afraid I would cut the trip short and lose the contract. She'd been afraid of being a burden. She'd been managing on her own in that recliner, rationing what she could reach, sleeping when she couldn't bear being awake anymore, and she had not called me. That is the part that stays with me. Not what my daughter did, what my wife endured because she loved us both too much to cause trouble. I retained a lawyer, not dramatically. I didn't storm in anywhere or make declarations. I simply called a family law colleague I'd been referred to years before and made an appointment. I laid out the situation with my documentation. She was a calm and efficient woman who had seen worse professionally, and she walked me through the options. There was the matter of the money. The $3,000 per month for 6 months was $18,000 paid for services that had not been rendered as agreed. There was the matter of the redirected grocery account. There was the matter of the canceled medical appointments, which, my lawyer noted carefully, in the context of a post-stroke recovery patient, had potential implications beyond the civil. She used the word neglect. She used it precisely, not dramatically, the way lawyers do. There was also the matter of what to do next and how to do it in a way that my wife would not find more devastating than the original harm. That was the constraint I gave my lawyer. Whatever happened, my wife could not be made to feel that she was the reason her family had broken apart. Because she would feel that. She would feel it regardless, but I was not going to give her cause to believe it was true. My daughter had a birthday that November. She'd planned a dinner. Not a party, just family. Her husband, their daughter, my wife and I, and a couple of her friends from her old job. She'd made the reservation at a restaurant in Ancaster that she knew my wife liked, the kind of place with linen tablecloths and a lengthy wine list and staff who remember your name. It was, I noticed, the kind of gesture that functions as both a celebration and a reminder. Look how thoughtful I am. I confirmed we would attend. I also, without mentioning it, confirmed the meeting with my lawyer for the following morning. My wife got her hair done for the dinner. She wore the earrings she saves for occasions. She was nervous in the way she gets when she's trying not to show something, and I held her hand in the car and I didn't push her. She had not been told, yet, the full scope of what I'd found. I had told her that I was looking into some financial discrepancies and that I had a lawyer involved, and she had gone very quiet, and then she had said, "Is it bad?" And I had said, "It's manageable," and she had nodded and not asked more. She trusts me. She's trusted me for 31 years. I do not take that lightly. The restaurant was warm. My daughter looked genuinely glad to see her mother, and I watched for whether that gladness was performed, and I couldn't say with certainty either way. People are complicated. I have known my daughter for 34 years, and I could not tell you, sitting across that table, whether she understood what she had done. That uncertainty is something I've had to make peace with. Her husband was in good spirits. He ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than it should have, charged to the table, which he'd said he was treating us to. He talked at length about a prospective deal at the dealership that was going to turn things around. He was confident in the way men are when they haven't yet absorbed the consequences of their choices. After the main course, my daughter made a little speech. She talked about family, about how much her parents meant to her, about how lucky she felt. She got a bit emotional. My wife squeezed her hand across the table. My granddaughter, who was seated beside me, had fallen partially asleep against my arm, the way children do in warm rooms after long meals. And I looked at that small face and I thought about what I owed her and what she was owed by the adults in her life. And I held her steady so she wouldn't slide. 3 days later, my lawyer filed the civil claim. I had deposited a portion of the documentation with the city's Adult Protection Services intake office the week before, on my lawyer's recommendation. Not because I wanted police at my door. I didn't. But because the cancelled medical appointments and the nature of my wife's condition and the duration of the neglect crossed a threshold that my lawyer said we had a professional obligation to flag. I agreed with her. The intake worker I spoke with was thorough and decent, and she explained the process to me in plain language, which I appreciated. My daughter received notice on a Thursday. She called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. She called 3 more times. Then her husband called once. Then she texted, "Dad, please call me. I don't understand what's happening. There's been some kind of mistake." I called her back on Saturday morning after my wife had left for her sister's, where she would be for the weekend. I wanted the house to myself for the call. "There's no mistake," I said. A silence. Then, "Dad, this isn't. We had an arrangement, and I know things weren't perfect, but—" 11 days, I said. "In October, 2 visits. Your mother was in the chair for 2 days without water within reach." Another silence. Longer. "She never told me she was struggling," my daughter said, and there was something in her voice that wanted to be genuine, and I sat with that. I really did. "She is not responsible for managing your awareness of her own suffering," I said. "That was your job. That's what I paid you to do." The conversation was not long. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I told her that the civil matter would proceed through our lawyers. I told her that the adult protection file was open, and that was not something I had the ability to undo, even if I wanted to. I told her that her mother knew the general outline, but not all the details, and that I was telling her this not as protection, but as a fact, because I didn't want her calling her mother and making her the audience for any of this. "Do you hate me?" she said. It came out small. I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it, which I hope counts for something. "No," I said, "but I don't know you as well as I thought I did. That's going to take some time." The civil claim was settled 8 months later. I won't put a number on what was returned to us because that's between our lawyers and it's done. What I can tell you is that it was enough to cover 18 months of legitimate home care, which is what we now have. A personal support worker named, well, she knows who she is, and she is kind and professional and never once makes my wife feel like a burden. And she texts me photographs of the bird feeder on days when a particularly good bird shows up because she figured out that I'd want to know. My wife recovered the weight she'd lost. She's back to her physiotherapy. She went with her sister to see a film last month, the first time she'd been out socially without me in over a year, and she texted me from the lobby afterward to tell me she'd laughed so hard at one scene she'd startled the woman beside her. I read that text standing in the garage, and I stood there for a minute before I went back inside. My daughter and I speak. Not easily and not often, but we speak. Her husband left the dealership, then left another job, and I have not offered to help, and I will not. My granddaughter comes to visit every few weeks, and she is 7 years old, and she has done nothing wrong. And I am careful about that, very careful, because she is the part of this that does not deserve any of the weight of what happened. I sold my wife's recliner. I told her I was getting it reupholstered, and then I bought her a new one, a better one, with a heat function that she likes in the evenings. She knows I got rid of the old one and she hasn't asked why, and I haven't told her. There are things in a marriage that you carry for each other without being asked. The porch light works now. I check the bulb every month. I don't know if I believe in simple lessons. I'm 67 years old, and most things that present themselves as simple lessons have turned out to be more complicated on closer inspection. But if you're asking what I would tell another man in my situation, another father in his 60s with a wife who is vulnerable and a child he trusted more than he should have, I would say this: love is not the same as accountability. You can love someone completely and still require them to answer for what they've done. The fact that it hurts to hold them accountable is not evidence that you're wrong to do it. It's evidence that it mattered. And leave the porch light on. Not for them, for yourself, for the reminder that someone should always know when you're coming home. There's an image I keep coming back to. My wife in that recliner, the room dark, the glass empty on the table beside her. She'd been there for 2 days and she hadn't called me. Not because she couldn't, because she didn't want to be the reason I came home early. That's who she is. And that's in part how this happened. I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about cause and consequence, not in any grand philosophical way, but in the plain, practical way you think when you're trying to understand how something went this wrong. The truth is, there were choices at every stage, and each one built on the last. My daughter chose convenience over commitment, month after month, in small enough increments that she may not have noticed the accumulation. Her husband chose to treat money that wasn't his as a buffer against problems he hadn't solved. And I chose to trust without verifying because she was my child, and the thought of auditing my own daughter felt like an insult to everything I believed about how I'd raised her. All of those choices had consequences. That's not a moral judgment, it's just what's true. What I've come to believe, slowly, not elegantly, is that the quality of a person's character is most visible not in what they do when things are easy, but in what they do when no one is watching and they're under pressure. My daughter was under financial pressure. She was also in a position of trust, and she had been placed there by 2 people who loved her without reservation. She chose herself. I don't say that to condemn her. I say it because it's the plainest description of what happened. The intelligence part of this, and I mean that in the practical sense, the ability to reason through a situation honestly, required me to look at evidence I didn't want to look at. It would have been easier to accept her explanation about the medication log, to let the discrepancies slide, to tell myself that the situation wasn't as serious as it appeared. That kind of willful blindness is very human, and I understand the impulse. But Catherine had been in that chair for 2 days. The cost of choosing not to see clearly was not abstract. It had a face and a name and cracked lips and cold hands. And the endurance part, the part that isn't dramatic, the part that doesn't make for a tidy story, was just the long months afterward. The lawyer appointments, the documentation, the calls I didn't make and the calls I did. The dinner where I sat across from my daughter and her husband and watched them order wine and talk about second chances they hadn't yet asked for. The morning I had to explain to my wife, in the softest terms I could find, why there were now legal proceedings involving our daughter. That conversation took more out of me than anything else in this entire ordeal. I don't know what my daughter will do with the consequences she's living with now. That's genuinely not something I can control or predict. What I can tell you is that the porch light is on every night, that my wife is back at her physiotherapy, that she laughed at a film last month hard enough to startle a stranger. That's what doing the right thing, slowly and without drama, actually looks like most of the time. Not a confrontation, not a moment of triumph. Just the gradual return of ordinary life, which turns out to be the thing worth protecting all along.